Hi friends, and welcome back to our watercolor for beginners tutorial series. Today we're painting something simple, some watercolor florals, as this is the main focus of the series. But the real focus of the lesson is actually something many beginners struggle with, and we slightly tackled already last week when we were discussing our color wheel. And maybe you have experienced this too, muddy colors. You start with a beautiful pink floral and you add another color, and then suddenly everything turns brown or dull. And it happens to basically everyone. So if this has happened to you, you're not alone. The good news is that muddy colors usually happen for one very specific reason, and once you understand why, it becomes much easier to avoid. So today we'll paint a few loose florals while learning how complementary colors interact and how to keep your colors fresh and vibrant. Doing so, we'll also revisit quickly the color wheel we created last week, because it explains everything. But if you want to have a more in-depth tutorial on how to create such a wheel and use it as a reference, feel free to check out last week's video. For this exercise, you only need a few things. You need watercolor paper, a round brush, water, and a few basic colors. We won't need all of these. I'll be using mainly a pink, or actually this pink, a blue, a yellow orangey color, and green. Maybe we pick the yellow from the other palette. Just so you know, I have a second palette sitting over here, which has yellow inside. I will use the yellow from this palette. So these are very similar to the limited palette we've been working with in previous videos. And the goal here isn't perfect flowers, it's understanding how colors behave. Let's start with a very simple flower. For that, you load your brush. I'm using the Van Gogh number 6 round brush, as always. And you load your brush with a pink color using the press and lift strokes we practiced earlier, so the compound strokes. In the series, we paint a few loose petals in a circle. Loose press and then lift, and we need more water. You can paint any shape you like. You don't need to follow the same logic. I'm just doing this for simplicity reasons. This is the more classic way of painting. Maybe you noticed that this time my paper, I use a different paper, which it seems like I'm not a fan of. It doesn't absorb as well. Doesn't behave the same way as my usual paper, but that doesn't matter. Leave whatever kind of shape you're drawing, leave a little space in the center. It looks pretty soft and vibrant, and the color is just clear and clean. Now we'll add a second flower nearby using a slightly different color, maybe a warmer orange or coral, so yellow, which I'm aiming for something similar here. Now, same logic. Loose petals. Okay. Oh. At this stage, everything still looks fresh and nothing muddy yet, right? Now, Now let's intentionally create the problem. I'm going to take a bit of green and drop this into this pink flower while it's still wet. And you will see what happens. What you see is the color here. Now let me drop the green next to it. Without any pink. What happens, it turns a muddy color. It turns very dull and flattened. And you can see it turns to be a little brown as well. This is the muddy effect that beginners run into quite often. And the reason is complementary colors. And do this again. Let's assume we take a red color. So in theory, these are all sitting next to each other, quite harmonious as a color concept. I'm just going to try and demonstrate this again with a little what do you call them? Which here still looks clean. Take the same green we used here, which is this one. Still looks clean. Now if I add this, you can see immediately how the color becomes brown and dull. If I would mix the two, then we use green. And it creates a brown color that is actually very similar. Now, why does this happen? If we look at our color wheel again that we drew last week, I'll link the video in case you wanted to create your own color wheel. If you have it nearby, this is a great moment to look at it. On a color wheel, complementary colors sit opposite of each other, directly opposite of each other, which means we have red and green, we have blue and orange, we have yellow and purple. And when these colors mix together, they cancel each other out. That's because complementary colors contain very different pigments. When combined, they neutralize each other and create a muddy tone, and sometimes that's useful, but sometimes it leads to muddy colors, especially with florals. Now, if we consider the classic flowers, when someone thinks of flowers, they often think of peonies, roses, tulips, and often they are red or orange, yellow. So we're usually, when we're talking about petals of florals, we're more inclined to paint warm colors. However, the stems, the branches, the leaves tend to be more within the green spectrum, so on the cool side of things. And this automatically creates a conflict with the red colors on the color wheel. And this is why often florals can be tricky for beginners, because this creates usually muddy or dull colors while you're actually trying to paint something that tends to be joyful and bright and colorful. Now, let's paint another flower or flower. But this time we'll keep our colors harmonious. For this, make sure that you have a very clean brush and clean water, ideally. Or 2 cups of water, one with warm colors and one with cool colors. or one clean and one dirty. So instead of mixing complementary colors, we'll choose analogous colors. Analogous colors sit next to each other on the color wheel, which we also discussed last week, meaning they tend to be 3 colors, but you can also combine any of the 3 colors that sit next to each other. These colors blend beautifully because they share similar pigments. So let's paint a flower using pink and a touch of red, for example. Make sure that you have enough water and pigment. And now we paint some pink, and then let's go into red. And we could even go into some orange. See how the blending doesn't create an undertone that is muddy or dull. It basically stays clear and vibrant. Even when they mix on paper, the result feels more natural and luminous, if that's the right word. And that is a great trick when painting florals to keep in mind, and also to make it a bit more interesting, but making sure that the composition on the paper is actually harmonious. If you want to reference the paper, we can do that too with, now these are warm colors, warm, cool. We can also achieve the same effect using cold colors. So let's assume we're taking blue. Oh, this is actually more purple, but that's okay. So we're taking blue, purple, and then maybe we're taking another type of blue, and you will see that actually they don't become dull. And we could even consider going in with a green color, and you will see that it doesn't make the color dull. There we go. Now, it sounds as if muddy colors are our enemy, but actually it's also important to remember that they're not necessarily bad. Sometimes you do want muted or muddy colors. Often it's actually often those colors are the colors that make a painting feel a bit more balanced. If every color is bright and intense, the painting can feel very overwhelming, and muted colors create a bit of contrast and calm. But the key is controlling it and using it intentionally and not accidentally. So understanding the color wheel is actually very helpful in making choices while you draw. So I can only recommend for you to create your own color wheel with the colors that you have in your palette, because they behave differently. But again, if you want to have a closer look, I'll link the video so that you can revisit it and learn a bit more about it. And then I tend to keep it somewhat close just to like double check in some cases. And I think it's a very, very useful reference to have. With your color wheel by your side, I'll keep it on the left so I can access my colors. With the color wheel close by, let's do a little exercise. We will paint 3 small flowers of different types. We'll start with the first one. That's going to be analogous colors like pink, red, and orange, similar to here. And then the second one will be complementary colors like pink and green. And the last one is using one color, but with different amounts of water. And then you can compare the results. Now let's start with the analogous colors, and we will be using pink, red, and green. Pink. Obviously here it's not about it being perfect. This is just about learning how it behaves. But of course, if you want to make pretty flowers, you can do that too. This is more just to practice. Maybe we have another petal that is a bit lower down here. This could be a very exotic flower. Let's see. Now I'm painting a purely pink flower. Let's assume we have a green center of the flower and circles. And here we have the effect of the muddy color setting in. Let's assume, and this is a technique we will go into more into detail, but within the next classes. But essentially, load your brush and we do now we wait a second. And you can build up color. So here you can blend it and it will build. And we can. This is a much more loaded brush. And then I'm going to do a very light one with a lot of water. And this is how you learn to control the intensity of your florals and how to layer them, essentially. This will provide you with more depth in your paintings. Now this takes a moment. Once this has dried, you take a little pigment, loads of water, and you layer on top of the existing petal. And this will give you the translucent effect that you have with actual flowers, so as if the light shines through. And here you see you build depth through the regular amount of pigment you had initially, and you can drop in, say for example, in the center is usually where it's darker, so you drop a bit more pigment, and this will create a nice effect as well, giving depth. So there are different ways to manipulate your color in order to create depth, transparency, and just interest within your florals. So feel free to test that out as well. And here, what we're basically doing is we're going inwards and outwards of the color wheel. Now, closing today's class, what we learned is basically that muddy watercolors usually isn't about a bad technique. It's usually about color relationships. And often, it's also, at least in my case, a matter of impatience. So once you understand how complementary colors interact, you gain a lot more control over as suggested, I would keep your color wheel nearby while you paint so that you can go back and reference. And it's one of the most helpful tools you can actually have. And next week, we'll keep building on this by exploring more floral techniques and color combinations. And until then, take your time, experiment with your colors, and enjoy the process.